Well, good morning to all of you, and thank you so much for coming. And thank you to Fasken for hosting us in their beautiful space. What a gorgeous morning, beautiful sunrise over the city. So welcome to our fall reception. I'm Bernardine Perreira. I'm the Executive Director of the Ontario chapter of the Maple Business Council. And I have the privilege of serving this group. I've been involved with Maple for a long time now as a member, for many years. So professionally, I'm a wealth advisor with cross-border capabilities. So when I first learned about Maple, it made so much sense for me to get involved. And at its inception, Maple was run out of Southern California. So there'd be 3 meetings in every quarter. So I'd fly down and I'd have a meeting in Los Angeles, Orange County, and San Diego. You know, I got very familiar with the coast of Southern California. So that was my introduction. And I got to know Stephen and Rob, who were the founders, quite well. So in any case, today I'd like to give an update on the Maple Business Council. And we have 2 wonderful speakers. We have Ian Campbell, who's here, partner with Fasken, who's going to speak to us about employment law, some hot topics. And we have Don Ross, National Sales Manager Canada for Roland DGA, and he's going to speak to us about growing a business in the Americas, a Japanese company in the Americas, and his experience. Then we'll wrap up, do a little bit more networking, and adjourn the meeting. So for those of you not familiar with Maple, really our mission is to promote bilateral economic ties between the US and Canada. It's cross-sector networking to help us get out of our usual swim lanes, right? So we all know what it's like going to a meeting where it's, it's all lawyers or all accountants or whatever, all people in our field. But here, just this morning, I think you've experienced the opportunity to speak with people from all different sectors, and it can be pretty stimulating and open up doors. So as members, we have individuals, we have organizations, anywhere from startup to enterprise, and networking events across 5 chapters now. So it started in Southern California, but we've grown. We offer storytelling platforms to members with binational reach. So these are presentations, articles, videos, opportunities for thought leadership. And we have partner organizations both in Canada and the US. And here's a picture of Maple at its inception. So Maple was founded in 2015, and the story, and somebody who's key in that story is in the room, James Villeneuve. Thank you for being here and your support over the years. So Maple was founded by Stephen Armstrong and Rob Kelly, 2 Canadian expat executives in Southern California who had started a Canadian expat social group. And the Consul General's office in LA approached them about perhaps making this a business group to promote bilateral trade. So they rose to the challenge, founded Maple in 2015. And so this is the first event at the intellectual property law firm Kenobi Martins in June of 2015. And they've been a strong supporter since the inception. And this February, as a matter of fact, they flew 3 partners up from California to present, along with Azar, who's part of Communitech, about startups and growing into the US markets. So now we're a community of over 70 organizations with over 140 members in 29 markets working in 27 sectors. And we're grateful for the support we've received over the years. And so this is just a snapshot here of the growing network. And as mentioned, it was started in 2015. And even in 2016, there were events in Vancouver and the GTA. And the New York chapter launched during the pandemic, 2020, as did the British Columbia chapter. And we started off our Ontario chapter last summer with, I believe, 3 events under our belt to date. And the Colorado chapter started in the fall of 2022. So a lot of growth and momentum. So new members in 2023, well, many, as you can see. I think we have about 20 new members, and you can see what I can point out is the diversity, not just in geography, but the types of businesses that have been involved. And wanted to highlight a couple here, Toronto-based, Ontario-based, so Greenberg Hamid, led by Noman Hamid and Howard Greenberg. So they specialize in employment law. And we also have Bermudez Intelligent Recruitment based out of Toronto. And I believe Tibise Bermudez is joining us online. Hello, Tibise. More new members as well. We have Castles recently joined, and we have Sean in the back representing the firm, and other colleague. Your name? David. David, yes. Hello, David. Welcome. Thank you so much. And they were just down in Denver presenting to the Denver chapter. Syndesis, also a new member. Hello, Darren. Darren Lum from Syndesis, so he's out of their Toronto office, and it was through the New York chapter that Syndesis found Maple. So it's really fascinating, the cross-hybridization that's happening. I'd like to draw your attention now to some of the recent Maple content. So as stated, storytelling is a big part of how we share between members and learn from each other. And we've had the privilege of sharing some wonderful stories this year through our monthly e-publication Momentum. And I'd like to mention 3 recent examples. So in June, we interviewed David Cohen, the U.S. ambassador to Canada in Ottawa on the occasion of Maple's 8th anniversary. Ambassador Cohen shared his insights on the work of the U.S. Embassy in Ottawa and his perspectives on the Canada-U.S. relationship. We also had the pleasure of sharing a great example of bringing people from different cultures together in an article by Danny Asaf, who together with his wife launched an annual event in downtown Toronto called Fast in the Six, which is a large event full of music and food during Ramadan, focused on breaking bread together with a free meal for everyone. It's an inspiring program. And just last month, former Canadian ambassador to the United Arab Emirates, Marcy Grossman, shared the work behind hosting the largest Canada Day celebration outside of Canada, which she and her team at Celebrate Canada Worldwide organized in Trafalgar Square in London, England. They have their sights set on having 100,000 participate at next year's celebration. So some remarkable stories. And then through our video platform, Maple Conversations, we recently interviewed the head of Quebec in New York, Delegate General Martine Hébert, on the economic and cultural ties that Quebec and New York State share, and some of the key initiatives of her team. Our video series now has more than 60 episodes, with more coming soon. Past articles and videos are on our 2 websites, maplecouncil.org and maplecouncilinsights.org. So there's a whole repository which you can access. And for Gold and Silver members, the opportunity to be featured there as well. Alex Rodoff. So our latest episode featured Alex. He's the founder and CEO of Toronto-based software quality assurance firm QA Consultants, who discusses the company's growth and acquisition by the French multinational Alten Group. So just a few examples. And if any of you were at last year's launch, last September, Alex Rodoff was our guest speaker. And they've been very strong supporters ever since, with a strong base of sales out of Los Angeles. So very involved members. So as mentioned, we have members flying to different locations to participate. Sean just back from Denver last week, and we have some other upcoming events. So whether you be in Vancouver or Long Island, New York, there's some opportunities, whether to be in person or join virtually through our remote platform. So following on today, so Vancouver, October 27th, we'll be welcoming guests to the Office of the Business Development Bank of Canada and featuring cross-border tax specialist Anderson. And wrapping up our fall series will be our New York chapter, who will be hosting a panel discussion on Canada-US trade and logistics at the Long Island Association. Scheduled to speak are the Consulate General of Canada in New York, TD Bank, and Purelator International. So that's the November 9th program. Well, now we come to the opportunity to hear from Ian Campbell at Fasken. So it's my pleasure to welcome Ian, tell you a bit about Ian. Ian is a senior partner in Fasken's award-winning labor and employment and human rights practice group. He's represented employers in all aspects of workplace law for the past 20 years. He represents unionized employees in labor arbitrations and matters before federal and provincial labor and human rights tribunals, as well as providing strategic advice on business plan, reorganizations, and collective agreement negotiations. Ian's expertise in the federal sector, he has expertise in the federal sector and regularly advises clients in railway, airline, banking, and transportation sectors. Welcome, Ian.
Well, I think first things first, I need to get a new picture because I look nothing like that anymore. All right, so hopefully I don't screw up the slides. There we go. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. It's so nice to have you all here. It's so nice to be using our space again after a brief hiatus. Have people back in the building on a regular basis is a real treat. So the world is a global one. People are operating businesses. They're operating in many different countries. And one of the main things, or one of the areas in which we do a lot of work, is helping clients when they're starting up operations in Canada or running operations in Canada, often from afar. And so what we have to do is we have to be able to explain, in this context, employment law, because people want to set up and they want to set up properly, and they want to be able to operate compliant with the terms. And but in order to do that, they need to understand what the rules are. And so what we're trying to do is we try and tailor our services so that depending on where the people are from, in this case, let's say the United States, we try and tailor our explanations and our tools and our services so that they can understand it by referencing what the requirements are in their home jurisdiction and taking lessons from that to say this and this and this are the same, but here are the areas in which we need to do differently. And by sensitizing them to that, we hopefully can assist them in setting up properly, avoiding some of the pitfalls, because if you start wrong, you start going way off course and you can end up very far off track. But then also just running and operating on a day-to-day basis in a way that makes sense, okay? And so it's about giving people the tools so that they can run the businesses the way they need to run it, whether it be small, medium, or large, and then we try and provide the support along the way. So we're going to be dealing mostly with inflow here because I'm a Canadian employment lawyer, and so we're going to be talking about some of the key differences that if you're advising a client, if you're setting up operations, what are some of the key differences that you need to be aware of? We're going to review some of the legislative requirements and hit on some of the key topics that come up time and time again. I'm then going to transition into a quick discussion about getting started. Okay, there are a couple of different methods or vehicles that people use when they're starting operations here. And so I want to talk through some of those sorts of things so that if you're ever assisting people, advising people, or you're who are trying to start up operations in Canada, it'll be hopefully a useful guide for that. And then we're going to finish off with some hot topics in the employment space, things that everybody needs to be aware of, things that are coming up in the future and that should be top of mind. So first things first, determining which laws apply. So when we're dealing with people, and this is sometimes even people in Canada get this confused, there are two sets of employment laws that apply in Canada. There is one set of rules under the Canada Labour Code that apply to federally regulated entities, which is actually a very small percentage, about 15% of the total workforce. These are entities that are national in scope, such as banks, railways, airlines, okay, interprovincial trucking companies, that sort of thing. Okay, they're regulated by the federal government because they're not housed in any one province. They're across the entire country. And so there's one set of rules that applies to them. But the vast majority of businesses in Canada are governed by provincial laws for labor and employment purposes. And so what that means is there are separate laws in each province that govern what it is, your obligations, employee rights, and employee entitlements. And so the first thing we need to do is help people to understand which set of rules apply to them. And I can't tell you the number of times I get phone calls or emails. I just saw this thing in the news. They're changing all the rules on us again. We're like, calm down. Those aren't the rules that apply to you. Okay. So understanding which of these two sets of rules apply is a first step. If you're in the federal sphere, one set of rules. Okay, there's been a lot of changes in the federal space. The Liberal government of Canada has unleashed an onslaught of changes over the last 5 to 7 years, which has radically altered the federal space. Compliance gaps are common because the changes are becoming so fast and furious that people can't keep up. Okay, that is, but at least it's one set of rules you have to follow. If you're in the provincial space, you need to be mindful of making sure managing compliance across jurisdictions. Okay, and this is something that all Americans will be very used to in terms of trying to manage the different compliance across states. Okay. So once we figure out which laws will apply, the principles we're going to talk about are generally consistent. Okay. So what are the differences you need to be aware of? Where I start in terms of the explanations here is the fundamental default principle on which all of the employment rules are based are the opposite in Canada than they are in the US. In the United States, no employee has a right or entitlement unless it is created by a contract or given to them in a policy. Okay? Flip that on its head in Canada. In Canada, employees have all rights, unlimited entitlements, until and unless they are limited or contracted away. And so the default starting position is that in the United States, you don't want policies that create contracts. You have to be very careful about contracts themselves. You'll see all sorts of language in American documents about this does not constitute an employment contract. And the reason for that is they don't want to leave the default of at-will employment, which I'm going to get to in a second. They want to sort of maintain the flexibility. Whereas in Canada, employment contracts and policies are your friend. And they're your friend because they can predetermine and limit exposure. They can set out expectations at the outset that will enable you to budget, that will enable you to plan, and that will be able to run your business more efficiently. Okay? So, at-will employment. And there are differences from state to state, so I'm going to make some generalizations here. But generally in the United States, at-will employment means if an employer wants to end a relationship, it can end it. It doesn't necessarily have any obligations to provide severance or separation packages unless they've entered into some form of contractual commitment or to do so. Okay? That's not true in Canada. It's the exact opposite. And termination and managing severance-related liabilities is a major focus for many people when they're entering the market because it can be a big cost, especially if you're a smaller company, and an important one to manage the risk on. Okay? So when we're looking at the regime that applies here across Canada, and whether we're dealing with the federal or we're dealing with provincial regulated entities, you need to be aware of two sources of law. The first is statute. So each province will have a statute that governs minimum wage, hours of work, overtime, employment standards is what we generally refer to it as. Each province has their own, and employment standards is built into the Canada Labor Code as well. Okay? So people say, well, I'm going to find out what do I have to, what are my obligations? What do I need to do? I look to the statute. Okay, well, that's an important place to start, but it's not the full answer. Statutes set a minimum bar that must be met. Okay, so you have to meet those standards, but it in no way limits what people may be entitled to. So the second set of law that you need to be aware of is the common law, just our common law established through decisions through the courts. And those under the common law, employees have entitlements that far exceed the minimum requirements under statute. So you need to understand what your statutory obligations are, because that's what the starting point and what you have to, at a base minimum, comply with. But you also need to be mindful of these other judge-made laws that also create additional obligations above and beyond what is specifically set out in the statutes. Okay? I'll pause for a moment. I don't want to neglect our friends in Quebec. The Quebec system is slightly different, civil law system, and there is a statutory code, the Labor Standards Code in Quebec, which is actually more prescriptive of exactly what you need to be doing in certain situations. And so, but the general rules we're speaking about would be applicable across the common law jurisdictions, which would be all the provinces outside of Quebec. Okay. And I've neglected to mention at the start, if anybody has any questions, feel free, pop up your hands. I'm happy to try and address them as we go, and we'll also leave a little bit of time at the end for that. Okay, so severance is an important topic. And so what we need to be mindful of is common law entitlements. And so, when I get called socialists by my American clients, and I do get called that often, I'm like, what the hell are you telling me? That can't be true. It's often when we come to the point where we have to part company with somebody, and we're looking at how we can do that lawfully and in a way that makes sense for the business. And so the starting point is, if you let somebody go, you have to determine what the reasonable notice period is. So this is derived from a contractual concept. Like if two businesses are doing business with one another and there's no written agreement, if you're going to end your relationship with somebody, you have to give them advance notice. If you're a major supplier of parts to their business, the common law for centuries has been you have to give them advance warning. And how much warning you need to give them is going to be based on how long you've been the supplier, and the nature and closeness of your relationship. And so if you're a dedicated sole source supplier for a major company, you've been doing it for 30 years, you're going to have to give them a heads up so they can plan, so their business doesn't fall apart, right? So that's the business concept and the contractual basis that where this all comes from. So that concept's imported into Canadian employment law. But because employees are so dependent on their employer as the source of income, it's like on steroids, okay? And so the rule here is, if you let somebody go, you have to provide them with the notice, advance notice, so they can go out and find another job. And what the common law tries to do is say, we're going to try and approximate the length of time we think is appropriate. And you are required to continue providing those employees with compensation over that notice period. And so a rule of thumb starting point is about a month per year of service. Okay. But if you're letting somebody go in the first 3 to 4 years of service, it's actually going to be much more than a month in all likelihood. Okay. People will be shocked. They've been here 8 months and I get a demand letter asking for 6 to 12 months of total compensation. Yeah, that's true. That's out there. It's not what it would end up at, but that's the claim. And the rationale behind it takes people a significant amount of time to find another job. The higher up you are in an organization, the more difficult it is to find a comparable spot. And so whether you've been there for 8 months or you've been there for 3 years, it's going to be a minimum of 3 months by the time you get your resumes out in the market, by the time you start to do interviews, let alone have a successful, opportunity presented to you. So, it can start to add up. Now, the other thing that people get a little bit spooked by is the fact that the default here is that when you owe somebody severance in this situation, it's not just base salary. It's not just benefits. It is often going to be all other forms of compensation, including incentive compensation, commissions, bonuses, LTIP, options, all forms of compensation. The default rule, unless you contract out of it, is that all of this needs to be continued over the common law notice period. And that can get really, really expensive. Okay. And the reason for that and the rationale for that is the assumption is that you would give them advance notice of their termination so that they can be working while they look for other work. That doesn't work in practice. Most people have that difficult discussion and then the person goes home. And what you're ending up doing is providing them with pay or compensation in lieu of notice. And so, when international operations and American companies start to do business in Canada, their incentive compensation plans, their equity plans will all be designed for an American audience. Okay. And it is crucially important that we turn our minds to how those rules apply in the Canadian context. Because especially if you're a smaller startup, especially if equity grants or options or a part ownership in the company or whatever it may be are a part of this deal, this can turn into a major factor, and it can be easily addressed, but you need to be aware of it first. Okay. So I think the theme is, if you come away with one theme through all these risks are manageable if you deal with them at the outset. If you set up plans and programs in place to make sure that they're addressed from the outset, there's no problem. It's when you get too far down the road without having turned your mind to them because you were unaware or you just didn't get to it, that it can become a more significant concern. Okay, other key concepts to be aware of: constructive dismissal. Okay, I was dealing with a client in California and they'd just gone through some major changes there, and they just unilaterally decided to change people's hours of work and change people's compensation. And it was fine because there's a process that you can follow under California law to do that. And when I had to explain to them that that's not something you can do in Canada, it caused them a great deal of concern. But constructive dismissal is a concept where if you make a significant change to the terms and conditions of employment, think title, reporting structure. You used to have 10 direct reports, now you have 0. bonus opportunities, any significant change. If the employee isn't agreeable to that change, they can walk away and say, you broke our deal. That was not the terms I signed up for. And despite the fact you haven't fired me, you owe me a severance package because you've constructively dismissed my employment by making this change. Okay? If you're looking at making any significant alterations to terms and conditions of employment, there are all sorts of ways to do it. You just have to do it properly and with some foresight and planning. But people will go in, they'll mistakenly, in the urge of the moment, pressing business needs, go in and make a decision, which they think for all the right reasons, no bad intentions, but they trip over this, and then they can have a problem on their hands. Restrictive covenants. We're sort of like California, except you have to take a little turn left once you get there. When it comes to these sorts of things, non-competition clauses are generally not going to be enforceable in Canada, save for in very, very limited circumstances. That's been the case for a long time now, but there's now governments have actually put this into statutes. So Ontario introduced statutory revisions which have actually now outlawed and made it illegal for you, or I shouldn't say that. It makes any contract containing a non-compete clause unenforceable on its face, unless you fall into one of a very limited number of exceptions, sale of business being one of them. Okay. However, that does not mean that you cannot protect your business by putting in reasonable non-solicitation, non-interference with business, non-solicitation of key staff. Those are essential provisions, especially in a smaller operation, to make sure that you don't go to all the work of building up goodwill, capital, presence in the market, and then have it all walk out the door one day. But the wording is key. Overtime and hours of work. The overtime rules, as many of you may know, in Canada are very different from the United States. In the United States, there's an exempt and non-exempt status, which often, but not always, depends on whether you're salary or hourly. And when Americans find out that paying someone a salary doesn't mean they're overtime exempt, it causes people's heads to explode. And so you need to appreciate when you're setting up compensation structures, don't think that defaulting to making somebody a salaried employee solves your overtime problem. Okay? And why is this important? We're seeing a real increase in wage hour litigation here in Canada. It started off about 15 years ago with a number of class actions against large employers. It then went quiet for a while, and that's mostly because it took so long for those cases to make their way through the court system. That's now starting to happen. They've met with some success, and we're starting to see it not only on the class level, but on an individual claims basis as well. Okay? And these can get really expensive, especially as your business grows and you've got more people. Okay? Okay, so you're getting started. Somebody's trying to set up operations in Canada, and I'm seeing this really as a fight for talent. Okay, I've got a lot of American clients. Some of them don't even want to operate business in Canada, but they're so starved for talent that there's Canadian talent they want to achieve. So how do we do this? And I've got several who started off that way, and then they said, well, we're there anyways. We might as well start doing business in Canada too. We're like, great, we can help you with that, right? And so this is all about sort of people oftentimes starting by putting a toe in the water and saying, we want to get a feel for this. What's it like? What's it like in practice? And then once they do that, hopefully growing and expanding and becoming an employer of a major business concern. And I think this is an issue that goes both ways. You need to engage a talent. How do you do that properly? And so, there's a lot of tax planning and considerations in going to do this in terms of how you're going to set up, whether you're going to incorporate a separate subsidiary, operate based on the U.S. company. But when you're dealing with staff, you need to figure out how you're going to engage those people. So one option is you register in Canada, you set up a payroll, you hire them as an employee in Canada, and you continue on that course. Okay? And that's going to be the cleanest often and make a lot of sense. But there are so many people that say that's just not doable, practically doable. It's too much work. I don't know what Canadian payroll is. I don't want to have to register with the government to do all these remittances and taxes. There's a whole bunch of other reasons. So when the numbers are small, they're looking for other solutions. Okay. And often it's a gateway so that once they dip their toe in the water and they get settled and established and they start to expand, they'll revisit this analysis. But they're looking for other ways. And so some people do it by engaging independent contractors. Okay, and so they will contract with the resource in Canada as an independent contractor for certain services or to do what it is they need them to do, and they'll treat it as a business-to-business interaction. Okay, there are significant risks associated with doing that. In all jurisdictions, you don't just treat somebody, if somebody really is an employee, you can't get around that by calling them a contractor. And so there are significant liabilities that can accrue, but there are some people that do that. But what we really have seen is the rise of payroll services providers. And these are companies, they started off as being staffing agencies who were in the temporary help and recruiting industry, but now it's expanded beyond that. And what they do is they say, we'll put your person on our payroll. We have a suite of benefits, basic benefits we can offer as well. You pay us, we'll take care of all of that for you. And that is a tool that I think is being used to go both ways across the border these days. It's a burgeoning industry. You need to make sure that you understand the nature of the relationship that you're getting into. So different PSPs will have very different terms of reference. You need to be exceptionally cautious. You need to make sure that you set the division of risks as between the customer and the PSP appropriately. You can set it up so that the PSP basically takes all of the risk if you do it properly, but that's not what their standard documents will do. So just be careful if you get a standard terms and conditions document that you look at it carefully and you have somebody maybe look at it, because you can save yourself a lot of time later if it's set up in the right way. So the employment agreement point again, whenever you're getting started, whether it be in a contractor agreement, an employment agreement, making sure you've addressed the key issues I've been speaking about this morning is essential. Okay, and so don't just take an agreement off the shelf, especially if you're starting and setting up. You want to make sure that you've got appropriate terms in there to deal with things like separation, to deal with things like post-employment obligations, to deal with things like IP risks and entitlements. Okay, that's another big issue. If you're doing anything related to IP, be very wary of engaging contractors. The default with the contractors, they own the IP. Okay, the default for employees is the opposite, that the company owns it because of the nature of the relationship. But you want to make that all crystal clear, because that's the last thing you want is a fight about IP down the road. Okay. You also need to make sure that once they're here, in whatever form, they've got certain basic policies set up. And the one I'm going to start with is harassment and discrimination. Okay. Whether you've got 2 employees or 20 employees, it won't be too long before somebody makes some form of harassment or discrimination complaint against you. And it is vitally important that you have policies in place that ensure that the minimum standards are met. You need to make sure there's a process in place where people can report concerns of this kind, that they're properly investigated, all these good things. It's not challenging. It's just something people don't get to. And while there are many other policies that I think would be good to have over time, Rome was not built in a day. And so it's important to prioritize. Okay, well, in just a couple of quick words on some hot topics. These are all issues that are coming up with increasing regularity, and this is for all in the Canadian context for everybody. Pay equity and pay transparency. So pay equity is something that's been around for about 30 years. There's been provincial regimes in place in Ontario and Quebec. Ontario was the first to introduce it in 1989. The federal government is just in the process of rolling out pay equity at a federal level. And what pay equity is it requires you to look at your workforce and determine if you've got female-dominated jobs in your workplace. And if you have jobs that are predominantly occupied by women, you need to go through and you need to value, and there's a scoring system that's used, each of the jobs. You divide them into bands. And if the process results, when you look at those bands, that there are female-dominated positions that are paid less than male-dominated positions, you're required to raise the rate of pay up to the higher level. So it's not employment equity. It's not job banding from a compensation perspective. This is intended to try and address gender-based wage gaps. Okay, it's a powerful tool. It can have, with larger corporations, it can have liability going into the hundreds of millions. And for smaller entities, it's not. But this is something that is top of mind these days with governments. The new federal regime has brought it back into the news again. And so this is something that all federal employers have to be in compliance with by September the 3rd of 2024. But at the provincial level, we've seen this really pick up again too. It's important if those are out there that this is addressed, because it's been something that's been ignored by many people. So even though Ontario's had this regime, it's basically a complaints-based regime, or you get audited. They don't have very many staff, and so there's not too many audits out there. And so people have been going 10, 20, 25 years without having done any upkeep or even have a pay equity plan in the first place. Something shows up on the door and it turns into a major issue because they can actually go back to 1989. It's not frequent, but it's theoretically possible under the statute. So pay equity is important. It's, again, something that can be dealt with, but it's better if you get in front of it as opposed to wait for a complaint to land on your door. Pay transparency. So employers have often wanted to have a little bit of a circle of trust around terms of compensation. They want you to maintain the terms of your compensation confidential. They don't want you sharing what you're getting for bonuses, what you're being paid, all of that sort of thing. The government has identified that as being a barrier to ensuring wage parity and pay equity. And so they've introduced, there's now legislation in several provinces which makes it illegal for you to penalize an employee for talking about their compensation or disclosing it to other people. You have to, when you're posting public job postings, post the pay rate or the pay range that's applicable to the position. And there's all sorts of other anti-reprisal provisions here. And most importantly, depending on the jurisdiction, there's also a requirement that you report on what you're paying people to the government using a reporting tool. And so this is kind of scary for people because you're having to provide the government with compensation data. And the federal sector is starting this. We've had some clients who submitted their first round of data, and then the government calls back and says, we don't think you've been paying overtime correctly. But we're like, this is employment. This is not a compensation review. This is pay transparency. We're doing this to sort of, and so it's once the government has that data, what will they be using it for? And so it gives rise to a number of other concerns. But this is coming to a neighbor. If it's not there now, it's going to be, because this is an easy thing for governments to do right now, to make it look like they're doing something without really any effort on their part. So it's a favorite of theirs. It's a Trudeau special. Vacation and PTO. Most American companies don't have vacation policies. They use paid time off or something of the like. Those policies don't work in Canada. You have to have a separate vacation policy. If you want to provide paid time off above that, that's fine, no problem. But again, this is an area that causes major problems. And the reason it does is because of the next point. Employment class actions are on the rise. And most recently, unpaid vacation pay is the top target for class actions. And so as you may have seen in the news, many large investment firms have been sued because they haven't been paying vacation pay on commissions. Hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, right? So for smaller organizations, won't nearly be that big, but if you haven't been properly paying out vacation pay, it's an easy target for a class action. And I'm going to wrap up by just the last point, resetting for the post-pandemic economy. And what I want to say there is there's been a real sea change I've noticed in the last 18 months. And this is just sort of a general comment at large, is that employees are not just sitting and taking it. They're angry and they're upset. And they're angry and upset because they feel, many do, that through the course of the pandemic, they went above and beyond. And whether that's true or whether it's perceived because of the other pressures they were facing outside, it's a real feeling. They now have come out of that into an economy that's uncertain, inflation at record high, all of their costs are going up, but their pay is not increasing to match. And so, with interest rates rising and their mortgage going up, it causes people to be unhappy. And anecdotally, we're starting to see for the first time, like real noises of there being reductions, staffing reductions. I've received several calls since Labor Day about people who are saying we've been trying to stick it out post-pandemic, thinking things would sort of go up on the rise, but we're not going to be able to do it anymore. And we're going to have to be looking at changes in the next little bit to address where we're at in the current economy, sales going down, not rebounding, that sort of thing. All this has created an environment where conflict has increased, okay? 10, 15 years ago, people would be able to get away with things because people either didn't know their rights or didn't care to assert them. But the environment we're in right now has has changed drastically the sort of basic underpins and is resulting in things that wouldn't have been a problem 5 or 10 years ago being things that are challenged right now. And so, again, a cautionary tale, not something you can't get out in front of, but just sort of an environmental read. So I think I've got 30 seconds left. That's not very much time, but if there's any questions, either now or at the end, I'd be more than happy to try and address them. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I'm in cross-border tax, and one of the big debates is whether CRA would respect payroll services providers as real employers, and thus relieving the real company of payroll obligations. And I think it's not clear, but we tend to say, well, if the payroll service provider has substance and does provide direction and control, then okay. But that's rarely the case. So have you seen this issue come up?
Yes, I have.
And could you just repeat the question back for the online audience?
So I'm going to try and paraphrase it. So if CRA comes a knocking and you're using a payroll services provider, could the end client still be on the hook for any? Is that effectively it? And so the answer is yes. I think if the CRA wants to make sure they get their money. And so from a remittances and a tax and EI and CPP, all the payroll deductions perspective, if they get the required remittances in respect of an employee, they're not going to be too fussed depending on where it came from, okay? If they don't get those payments, however, they are going to go through a much more robust analysis, and there is a real risk that they can find a co-employer with the end client. And so if they can't get it directly, they're going to get it indirectly. And we've seen this in legislation dealing with temporary help agencies and the like. It's the same sort of concept. No government is going to want to see the employee or themselves not be paid, and they're going to find somebody to pay it if they do. So we have seen a proliferation of fly-by-night payroll service providers who are maybe doing it properly and maybe they won't. They seem to be on the wane. And you're seeing larger companies, more reputable companies sort of entering the space to address this very concern that we're real, we've got substance, we've got assets. And so when they give you an indemnity saying, yes, we're going to make all the required payments and we're going to give you an indemnity if there's any trouble, it means something. And so I've seen clients putting a much bigger emphasis on that, and also creating contracts that have an audit function where they can send somebody in, if they don't know enough themselves, send somebody in on their behalf periodically to do a spot audit to make sure they're comfortable that the services that are supposed to be provided are being provided and being provided properly, i.e. the required remittances are being made. Anything else? Thank you for your time. Oh, thank you.
That's all right. Thank you very much, Ian. That was a very insightful talk. Our second presenter this morning is Don Ross, National Sales Manager with Roland DGA. And Roland DGA is headquartered worldwide in Hanamatsu, Japan. And their Americas base is in Orange County, California, for sales and marketing. Don leads Roland's growth in Canada. And a little bit about Don. Don hails from Montreal and has had a rich and varied career, if you can skim his bio here. Notably, raced professionally for Yamaha Motor Corp and says he has the scars to prove it. Don was asked by Roland in 1995 to start a Canadian branch office and has been doing this for the last 28 years. Don has also served 2 terms on the board of directors of the Sign Association of Canada and ran their annual trade show for 6 years. Welcome, Don.
I've never been 6 foot tall. As hard as I tried, 5'9" was it, and I've shrunk a bit since attaining that height. Gravity has taken hold. When I first went to Japan, however, 50 years ago, I know some of you are doing the math, he must have been 3 or 4, right? I have this vivid memory of these young school kids, like about that high, walking to school, holding hands, all wearing color-coded hard hats. I mean, what a concept. And when some of them looked up at me, I was thinking at the time, maybe it's because I'm really tall compared to most of Japanese society. Now, they were probably saying, who's this alien who just landed in our midst? So I'm Don Ross. I manage the Canadian business for Roland DGA Corporation. The DGA stands for Digital Graphics America. We have an office in Barrie where we employ a small staff. Now, I started sweeping the floors for Roland. No, I'm lying. I never swept the floors. That was job one when I was 12. My point is, today's XYZ generations want instant gratification. They want to ascend the corporate ladder, and would a couple of months be okay? This is the just-in-time generation, but it's the instant gratification generation. We're in the age of Prime. I'm pretty sure I could order a car from Amazon and it'd be delivered to my office next day, freight included. Now, Roland is a Japanese company trading on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. And Japanese mentality has evolved as all of our mentalities have, but it's quite unique and different from that of North America. For one thing, they function in teams rather than individuals being singled out for praise or because they screwed up somehow. So we manufacture actually a lot of what we do in Thailand now, following Japanese engineering guidances. We're just in the process of finishing a new state-of-the-art building, our headquarters in Japan, and the entire rooftop of the building is all solar panels from corner to corner. It's quite a sight. So we've started decorating our headquarters with Roland decorated items. In 1990, we opened up in Orange County in Irvine. Our head office exists there for the Americas, North America, Central, South America. We have 120 employees, give or take, 54,000 square feet. And then we do all of our distribution offsite in Ontario. Subsidiaries all around the world, and I can pretty much guarantee that there is a Roland device in every country in the world. We have satellite offices, Boston, Atlanta, and our office in Barrie. And in those offices, we do demonstrations. We show people how to do various tasks. We print samples, and we have open houses on a regular basis. These images, the bottom one happens to be part of my Barrie office, in the middle happens to be in the UK, and the top one is in Denmark. They all kind of look the same. The graphics might be different, but all accomplishing the same objectives. So in 1995, we branched off from Roland Music Division. We recognize that Canada is very different from the US. There are all sorts of US concerns that think it's just like opening up another branch, and that's not necessarily the case. We've always been of the theory on a global scale that local involvement, local engagement, in this case employing Canadians wherever possible, helps to normalize the office. And we ship primarily from the US, from Southern California, or directly from Asia in the case of full containers. We work with an authorized dealer network across the country. And in our office in Barrie, we do training of service technicians that are employed by all of these dealer resellers. It's part of the contract with them that they have to provide the after-sales service. So now I know if I need to open a new Canadian branch, I just have to call Ian and he'll set me straight on where we have to go. The Inter-Canada Company Transfer Work Permit allows for opening up a branch in Canada pretty easily. Tax treaties with the US businesses are not necessarily subject to double taxation. Foreign branches entitled to many of the same rights as Canadian-owned corporations, such as limited liability. So we've had a Canadian-based lawyer previously, and that's the only route to go if you're planning on opening up a branch office, is to connect with a lawyer, and there's probably one or two around here that. So in terms of manufacturing, in our particular division, the printing division, we have three main product groups, differentiated by the ink type that they're using. There's Eco Solvent, which is a mild-based solvent. This particular printer sells more than any other printer for outdoor durable graphics around the world. It's ideal for signage, for instance. We came out recently with what we call a resin-based printer, also known as a latex, and essentially it's a water-based ink for environmental concerns. Applications like schools and hospitals are requiring more and more that what they're printing with is as environmentally friendly as possible. We also have a couple of series of UV printers, and we call it UV ink, but the process is UV lamps curing the ink on top of the surface. So you can print on just about anything and layer it up if that's your objective. These are some examples of labels and packaging. And when we print, we also offer the capability of doing a die cut around the graphic. All sorts of outdoor applications, as well as indoor applications, from posters to artist canvas. There's a wide substrate of media that can be printed onto. And we're very cognizant of market trends. We know every quarter how we compare to all of our competitors on a global scale. And UV type printers are definitely on the rise from all of our projections. This kind of shows you the difference between Europe and Asia, and then America on the other side. Different vehicles, but the same printed graphics that get applied to these cars. The NASCAR one, we're actually a couple of weeks, we have a trade show in Atlanta called Printing United, and we're going to have this NASCAR in our booth, and the people that we work with at Richard Childress will come and take all of the graphics off of it and install new graphics over the course of a couple of hours. So just having showed you that, we're kind of in the printing business, we really don't consider ourselves as actual manufacturers. What we like to think of ourselves as we're making opportunities for people. We're fostering creativity, and in many cases, we make dreams come true. Every once in a while, I'm at a trade show and someone comes up to me and says, "Thank you." Okay, for what? You've changed my life. I spent $10,000 on a printer, and I've made $100,000 on with that printer over the course of the past year. And that's not an isolated story by any means. So we've changed more from a product-based mentality to market or application-based focus. So we're in the worlds of signage, digital fabrication, personalization, vehicles, packaging, labels, home decor, events, apparel, etc. Now we've had issues in the print sector. Everything is going digital, and the printer of old, trade shows really haven't stayed current. running antiquated courses on how to print. Students have graduated recently with the same knowledge that Gutenberg had in the 1450s when he printed the first Bible. Our focus as a company relates to digital inkjet devices as opposed to traditional printing of newspapers and magazines. We've come to realize that we need to market ourselves as exciting, relevant, and financially rewarding. This has led us to what we call the SOHO experience, small office, home office, or out-of-home type businesses, which have blossomed like crazy. Creativity, intuition, curiosity, imagination will be the most employable skills in the next century, at least until we transition to the age of robots.
Is that the little glitch we talked about? Oh, yeah.
I think I missed a slide. I have a slide in here of San Diego Chargers or LA Chargers NFL football team. Picture of these people in their seats with two robots from the new movie that's coming out, The Creator. And they're just sitting there calmly as a robot should. And these people beside them are kind of like, okay, row H, section 224, seat 23. A couple of good old boys that would not go down very well. So artificial intelligence, and I know Maple has some engagement in that direction. According to Sundar Pichai, which he owns or he's the head of a small company called Alphabet, which owns Google, a Roland customer, by the way. I'm probably breaking NDAs there, but I know where to go for lawyers. And the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative is set to develop an AI-driven computing system specifically designed for life sciences research to delve deeper into the study of human cells and diseases using AI. With major investments such as this, we can expect accelerated advancements in medical science, potentially leading to groundbreaking treatments and solutions for various diseases. AI is going to impact the North American workforce by 44% in 3 years. If you're not aware or don't know anything about it, it'd be a good time to start learning about it. It's according to Mr. Chan, Pichai, it is the single most important element of computing that has come along. It will be far greater than desktop to mobile, far greater than the internet itself. Pretty bold statements, but he certainly knows what he's talking about. Now, we do all sorts of demonstrations by Zoom and Teams and Google Meet. In demonstrations to come, we'll be using a robot who, much better looking than I am and gives a better presentation, and robotics is coming. These are a couple of, we do all sorts of trade shows. Most of them are pretty normal, but some of them are a little way out there. We started out with this Generation 1 versus Studio BN20. And in the past 3 years, we've sold 11,000 of these in North America. Where they all are, no idea. But they're in people's basements and entrepreneurs' homes that start off with a hobby and exploded into a business. So recently we've come out with the second generation. Our second generation's devices are usually better than our first generation. And it prints 4 times as fast. So 25 square feet per hour. If you don't own one, you really should get one. These are pretty growing business, one printer at a time. And the second one will outdistance our first generation by 4-fold in the next 2 years. So yes, some interesting trade shows we got involved with. One of those was a cannabis trade show here in Toronto, and that definitely brings a different type of people to the floor. Our product manager for that small device, she finds all of these shows that we never as a company would ever consider, and all of a sudden she's there with that small 20-inch printer showing everyone that you can print posters, banners, look around you. It's all that all could have been printed on one of these small printers. So yes, we have found ourselves in different types of trade shows thanks to her. And these are just some examples of, we also are in the dental business. I have to give credit to our dental people because they make huge amounts of money. People in the dental industry don't seem to care about what the prices are. So all sorts of different products. And if any of you are up in the Barrie area at any time and you want to drop by we have pretty good espresso and the odd glass of wine. So feel free to drop by anytime. Thanks very much.
So yes, before we return to some more light networking, I'd like to thank James Villeneuve again, Martin Denny's, who is the managing partner for Fasken in Ontario, Gesta Abels, co-chair of Fasken's US practice, and Ian Campbell, and team for your wonderful hospitality. We really appreciate the opportunity to be at your office, and thank you for all your support. And thank you to our speakers again. Thanks to Ian and Dawn for sharing their expertise and knowledge and market insights. And thanks for everyone here and online. We couldn't do it without you. Maple is all about community and sharing ideas. So thank you for your attendance, your attention, and look forward to seeing you at the next event. Bye for now.